Hey everyone, this is the Gleix Video Synth number 8. It's an audio-visual synthesizer and feedback machine, as well as a glitchy visual effects processor. Deals primarily with composite video, and it's the next in a line of video-centric commissions that I'm currently working through. I've been trying to do something new and unique with each of these builds, and this one is no exception, with one big aesthetic feature being this CNC'd front panel here, as well as the rear I/O. So I picked up a little desktop CNC earlier this month, and I've been really happy with the results once I learned my way around it. So this is the standard aluminum front panel, just painted black, and it's had this design engraved into it. So before going forward, I do want to note that I've already done fairly exhaustive overviews on these sorts of machines that go in depth into the available feature set, minus a couple things that I'll show in this video. So if you want to learn more that I don't cover fully in this video, I'd highly suggest checking out the video for GVS006, which I called the I.F.D. In the video for that one, I go into everything that it does in a lot of depth, and there's also like 5 hours of demo footage where I really dive deep into both the audio and the visual capabilities of these machines. So I will link those in the descriptions and put up a link now as well. Speaking of the I.F.D, this one is fairly similar to that build, but all of these machines are custom made to client needs, and I'm always experimenting with new processes. So this one adds a few things and leaves out a few things that weren't requested, namely CV implementation for the color and image control. Anywho, let's get into this thing a little bit. On the right, we have a latching button for power on and off. This thing is going to France, so I've included a switch to go between NTSC and PAL video output. We have a 2.1mm barrel jack for power. This runs on 5 volts, and the jack is center positive. This takes audio input, which you can send either through an 1/8 inch jack or a 1/4 inch jack. We have a VGA video output, a composite video output, and a composite video input. And this switch right here will let you choose between just having an internal feedback loop like we have right now, or processing an external video source. So everything's kind of laid out in sections. Over here is like our primary motion and movement control. Over here is our control over color. Up here is for the external audio input, as well as a noise generator. Up here is for dialing in settings with these buttons. And this is where we can pull audio out of the machine, as well as add glitches to the internal feedback loop or an external video source. Over here is image shift up, down, left, and right, so we can move the image around on screen, which will also change where the feedback is extending. So if we wanted to extend upward, we could push the image up. This button with a magnifying glass here will let us easily zoom in and out. So if I zoom in, then our feedback will rapidly start expanding outward. This button here is for a menu where we can make some useful adjustments, like the horizontal size to stretch it out, the vertical size to stretch it upward. Things like brightness and contrast will let us get more or less pastel. Things like hue can let us add more or less bands of color and play with different color spaces. And then this yellow button here is a freeze button, which will freeze whatever you've got on screen. Same thing with this switch, it's just a way to latch it. Good way to pulse things rhythmically, or just hold a look that you like. So one other thing about this freeze feature is that if we have it turned on while the device is turning on, we let it boot up and then turn it off, we'll start up in this alternate pixel mode where everything's kind of quantized and blocky. Really like the way this looks. Over here are the main color mix knobs for red, green, and blue, as well as buttons to pulse red, green, and blue on and off. Over here is our primary oscillator. It has 2 different modes. It can act as an LFO or just a standard oscillator, so we can dial in scan lines in different colors. So here's our on and off. We can send it to the red, green, and blue channel. Let's send it to the red channel. This is additive, not subtractive, so we will need to dial that color out to see anything. Now we'll see that the color red is pulsing with this LED. This LED is our rate. We have rate, shape, and depth controls for the LFO. So if I dial down the speed, it's pulsing very slowly. And then this switch above it in the triangle will let us go to standard oscillator mode. So if I put that in the up position, then we can now locate multiples of 60 Hertz and get scan lines in that color. So here is around 60 Hertz. Let's increase it a bit, try and find 120. Send that to both the red and green channels. Let's send that to every channel. And then let's dial out the shape a little bit so it's a bit softer. So this might be a nice way to add a bit of additional motion. Up here are controls for the audio input. This is a switch for turning on and off an internal audio amplifier. We also have gain control, so let's turn that up. And then we have sends for the red, green, and blue channel. I'm going to again refer to the video for the I.F.D because in that one I do go fairly in depth into how this audio input works, what it does, and how you might utilize it. The basic thing to understand here is that you can send audio to each of the color channels and it will create scan lines on screen based on the frequency of the sound coming in. So if you send a pure tone, then you can create scan lines at frequencies of 60 Hertz, or if you're playing music, you can create dancing scan lines on screen. So at very high gain, this audio amplifier is a little noisy, but in this case, it's nice because we can send that noise to color channels and get some more unique looks. We can build kind of a noisy vertical column, which I really like. If we send it to all three color channels, we can get black and white, and that'll interact with some other features of this machine in unique ways if you want to play with monochrome. But I'm a big fan of creating these sort of columns up the center. Different colors. So it's just another way to build some unique things for that feedback to grab onto. These buttons up here correspond to another part of the feedback chain where we can make some adjustments. This black button brings up some menu items like brightness, contrast, saturation, and hue. And these items are saved between turning this thing off and on. So typically I'll dial these in how I like it till I have a nice starting point for feedback, and then once turning it on, I'll play around in this menu a little bit more for experimentation, since this menu is full of items that are reset when the device is turned off. And then there's this 24-point Patchbay. It does a lot, so I'm going to again refer to the video of the I.F.D where I explain this in a lot more depth. Basically though, we've got a point that corresponds to red, green, and blue. horizontal and vertical synchronization, and then a ton of other points for experimenting with adding glitches and other effects either to our internal feedback loop or to an external video source on this model. These points for red, green, and blue are where we can take audio out of the machine. The audio sounds like this. Kind of crazy and alien sounding. It corresponds to the color channel that we're sending out. So if we're sending out of red, then the audio that we're getting corresponds to the color red on screen. And if we have our oscillator being sent to the red channel, then that will also be in our audio output. And then this is also where we can send external signals into the machine. So I have a signal generator running off screen at a frequency in the kilohertz range designed to create diagonal lines. Let's send that to the red channel. And then I've also dialed another one in for lines in the opposite direction. Now, this sort of technique is something that I'll go over a bit more in a future video that I have planned, where I'm going over my DIY video modular, which has some signal generators in it as a means of creating shapes and whatnot. So again, if you're interested in hearing what this thing sounds like and seeing what sort of glitches are capable with the Patchbay on the internal feedback loop, I've linked to a ton of extended demo footage in the video description that also has the corresponding audio. So then last but not least, our external video source. So now let's talk a little bit about processing external video with this machine. So what this sort of ends up being is a bit of an extension on one of my first video builds, the VGS35, which is basically just this Patchbay and image direction controls in a box, but it only took VGA in. Composite is a lot more common, a lot more useful to most people, so that's what we've got here. We can still play around with the Patchbay and add some interesting glitches and effects. We can still just, let me pull up something with a little more detail here. Perfect. So now you can see a little bit more of what I'm doing here as far as color goes. So we can do basic color mixing still on our external image. Let's try that kind of thresholding effect. We can still send our oscillator to different color channels, multiple channels. We can still add scan lines. We can still add noise. And all of these things together make for a really nice bit of visual effects on an external source. And I think where this really shines is definitely integrating the Patchbay in different ways. Then the other thing to think about doing is, if you are used to making feedback loops with a video mixer, this is a perfect candidate for that. So let me get a basic setup in software going. So now I've got this set up as a basic video feedback loop. I'm doing it in software just because I don't have a video mixer handy. But what is happening is I have this output going into a piece of software. I'm compositing an image on top of it and then sending this image back into itself. So whatever changes we make in the in-between will continuously feedback because this output is being shown to itself. So if I take out the cat really quick, there's a classic analog video feedback type look. So let me pull that all the way out. Let's make our text red. And then we can play around with the feedback on our video source. We can still freeze it. We can still play with the Patchbay. Now let's get like a classic Luma thresholded feedback look. So now I'm going to threshold the image and then composite that thresholded image back on top of the video source. So now everything that isn't keyed out is being added to the feedback. Kind of a classic lo-fi technique that gets used a lot in video mixers. There we go. This is what you want. Thumbs up, stock image, businessman. This is what you really want in life. And this is also what you want on screen at the concert. It's thumbs up, businessman. Fantastic. His numbers are great this quarter. You kidding me? You seen his numbers? You know how many sales this guy got? Too many sales. Unbelievable. I don't believe how many sales he got. So that ought to give you at least an idea of how you might play around with this thing as an external video processor or as part of a feedback chain. So, as always, I want to say thank you for checking this out. If you'd like to see more of this thing and others like it, you can check out my website, gleix.net, which I update regularly. This is also where you can find a catalog of previous builds and get in touch with any questions you might have or ask about having something commissioned for yourself. You can find me at Gleix on Instagram as well, if you want to keep up with what I'm doing. And I also want to give a shout out to Yovazol, who recently put together a video about people who are making gear for video art. I would highly recommend checking it out if you haven't yet. Also want to shout out Lo-Fi Future. If you're curious about the basic setup for a no-input video feedback loop, they've got a great guide on making your own. Again, that's gleix.net, at Gleix as well, and I will see you here with the next one. Take care, everyone.